When you don't take time to look at it through other people's eyes. Take some time and reflect on what you believe in your soul. Cause that is the key to life. You gotta let the negativity go.
Hello and welcome to What the Fox podcast with your two hosts, Lindsey Fox and Amber Ross. Today's episode is sponsored by therapyappointment.com. Therapy Appointment was built for therapists by therapists and for you to find a therapist. So please check out therapyappointment.com. In addition, this episode is also sponsored by conscioushealers.com, which just so happens to be my coaching business. I, Lindsey Fox, and am an empowerment coach. So I work with my clients to help them build self-confidence, build leadership skills, improve communication skills, learn how to set healthy boundaries. And today's episode, we are actually talking about how to have vulnerable conversations. So that kind of ties right into all the good things that we could all learn a little bit more about.
It definitely does. And I'm really, really pumped to finally get to this topic because it's something that we do here each and every week on What the Fox podcast, because we're having these vulnerable, these hard, these heavy, these introspective conversations, and really allowing a space where people can put themselves out there, where they can be seen, where they can be heard, and also doing the same for ourselves, right? So,
oh yeah,
it's not
last week's episode was so vulnerable. I mean,
yes,
holy cow! If y'all have not listened to last week's episode with our guest speaker Nick Tucker, that the episode title was "Prune Your Life," and he essentially is just talking about how he had to prune his life in face of adversity and hardship, and how it brought him where he is today. And I don't think I've ever cried that much in an episode.
I know that was definitely that was a deep heart episode, and I'm glad we had the opportunity to record with him. And I'm so glad that he had the vulnerability and the bravery to be able to share his story so openly and share about his experience in life. And I think that really spurred us to want to talk about this. And I think you have to start at the start, right? So, Lindsey, do you want to share for the benefit of our listeners what vulnerability actually is, what it looks like in this context?
Yeah, and I actually want to kind of zoom out and say not even necessarily in the context of just in the realm of having guest speakers on the podcast, but as a whole, the people who are struggling to communicate under certain environmental conditions. That is what a vulnerable conversation is. When we are struggling to have conversations where we are stating our needs, our desires, how to feel safe under certain conditions that feel like they could potentially be threatening or risky, or it could put us at risk of feeling rejected. That is what a vulnerable conversation is. So it's not really something that we take too much time to define very often, yet it's something that we're more familiar with feeling on a visceral level on the inside physiologically.
I agree. Because oftentimes I think that we want to fit in, we want to mold with the crowd, we want to blend in. And I think vulnerability is that act of choosing to be seen for exactly who you are and, letting the mask down, letting whatever guard down, and actually speaking up for your feelings. And as a society, that makes us all a little uncomfortable to actually say, hey, I'm having this feeling. I need you to acknowledge it. I'm going to acknowledge it out loud so that we're all on the same page.
Oh, yeah. And you put yourself at risk of, what if they don't accept me? What if this is an unpopular opinion? And how will people respond? And so there's a lot of different layers to that. But I think as we get into, transitioning from what a vulnerable conversation is, we have to talk about how to have the vulnerable conversation in a space of feeling confident with stepping into something where our ego can be profound and getting in our way of making that conversation happen.
Absolutely. The fear of rejection is a real thing, right? And rejection on any capacity.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And actually, one of my coaching clients, he he gave me permission to share this. So
Oh,
I
okay.
would like, he's actually working on writing a book. I would love to have him on the podcast sometime when he's ready. And he has said he definitely wants to come on. So to be continued, y'all. His name is
Love it.
John Masso. And he is writing a book all about his um, trials and tribulations over the course of an entire life of gaining weight, losing weight, gaining weight, losing weight, a lot of weight cycling, and how this ties into, just how he has shown up in relationships. And so
Mm.
he shared like a little excerpt from the book that he's writing. And I just want to touch on a little bit of it because
Yeah,
I definitely
absolutely.
feel this connects to the how with regard to how to have that vulnerable conversation. Um, he was sharing kind of like barriers toward him being able to have the vulnerable conversations. And he said, my ego would flare up a lot when I was being rejected or told in my head I wasn't good enough. I would end it all. Then I learned to listen and appreciate what is being shared with you. Right or wrong, it is that person's opinion. Another person's opinion is just that. Again, maybe it is right, maybe it is wrong, maybe it's in between. Sometimes our ego flares up because what is being shared is true, or maybe because it hurts and we need to protect
Mm.
ourselves. If you disagree with what you are hearing, that's okay. Doesn't mean we need to blow the other person up for it.
Fact. Yeah.
Right. And so it really does. I really like that little excerpt because it's so true. When we hear something that doesn't jive with us and we experience like a profound mood shift in
Hmm.
response and want to attack or pop off and defend ourselves or say that's not how I feel or whatever, and we
Yeah.
have that high level of reactivity, we need to check ourselves and say what's going on there.
Yeah. What's that
'Cause-
triggering in me? Why am I having this response? And I think it's a great point because you and I have struggled with this over the years, right? And I struggle with this personally because if somebody shares something with me, oftentimes my first instinct is to want to fix the situation, like do
Mhm.
whatever it is to fix the problem, whether it is mine to fix or not. Because
Mhm.
sometimes vulnerable conversations aren't always like, hey, I'm feeling this way about something you did. Sometimes it's,
Right.
hey, there's this thing going on in my life and I'd like to talk with you about it, whether that's venting or sharing or just
Yeah.
like allowing someone to see something that's happening in your life.
Yeah.
And I think one of the reasons that we wanted to do this topic is because I asked Lindsey, I'm like, hey, it would be really great to walk through what that actually looks like. So, how do you show
Mhm.
up in that vulnerable conversation as someone who is holding space for a friend or,
Mhm.
partner or family member or whatever the case is,
Yeah. Yep.
and like be a true and real, genuine human in conversation and in community, right?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Because I think another part of this too, which I'm hearing you touch on, uh, to that end, I know that this came up in some of our grief episode or episodes
Mm,
about grief, which is on being on the receiving end of that vulnerable conversation can make us feel so uncomfortable at times that because we're the ones feeling uncomfortable, we are then inserting ourselves into someone's
mhm.
arena and we are trying to fix and make things right and we're trying to control it because we're feeling uncomfortable.
That's yes. And I think I love this example and I'm going to bring this up and if you don't want to talk about it that's fine. You can choose not to, but I think you just experienced a very real example of this recently,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah, yeah.
you've been very open about the fact that you've been working through a divorce over a number of years. And I think as you announced that it was finalized and concluded recently, you had a lot of
Woohoo!
DMs. Like, yes, there's woohoo. But you had a lot of DMs and comments that were a little off-putting. So do you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah,
Ugh.
there definitely were. Yeah, I definitely want to say woohoo because
Yeah.
for those who have not been like maybe for our new listeners here, um, I left a very toxic marriage
Mm,
a few years back. And the person I was married to was just really not, he just this idea of radical acceptance was just never going to happen. And he
Mm-hmm.
would not let go of the marriage or me for that matter. And things, it escalated toward in an unsafe way. And ultimately, it took more than or almost 3 years to actually get divorced. So this divorce just finalized in January 2023. So just recently. And this was a major milestone in my life of just saying, finally, I'm finally free.
Yeah. And in your mind, right? It's a celebration, but it's not a celebration that's like negative. It's not like
Right.
we're not bashing people, we're not taking anybody
No.
down. It's just very much I
Yeah.
have my life back and I get to take
Yes.
this next step and like
Mhm.
bloom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that is an excellent point. And you're right. That is a part of the vulnerable conversation aspect of things because um, sometimes when we see what someone's going through, we feel like we want to show alignment with them. We
Mhm.
want to show, wow, I want to hold space for this, situation or this emotion or whatever that you're going through. So I'm going to align with you by expressing my emotions and assuming that they are the same as your emotions. And
Yep.
that's how we're going to connect. um, oh
Spoiler
my
alert,
gosh,
that's
Amber,
not
your
it.
eyes.
Like that's not I just
You guys have to, y'all have to subscribe on YouTube. I mean, seriously, the facial expressions that go down, Amber cannot hide her feelings on her face. Like she just rolled her eyes so freaking hard that I felt it in the depth of my soul.
didn't even realize I rolled them. Okay.
I
It's
know.
my
um,
face does things. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. It's just what
it
it
is,
is at
it's
this
who
point.
you
But
are, and I want you to keep being exactly who you are.
I felt it. I want to pull back to this because I remember seeing some of the like public comments people were making where they're like
Yeah.
getting really aggressive and like going
Yeah.
after just an interesting perspective that you did not enjoy or align with, right?
Yeah, yeah, and honestly, it definitely. So again, I noticed the mood shift within my own body because I
Yeah.
got actually kind of angry. But the comments that Amber is the types of comments that Amber is alluding to were things like, I'm just paraphrasing or whatever, but stuff like, you know, good for him, good for you, fuck him,
Yeah. It was
whatever,
very negative in tone. It was very like,
Yeah, and it was, like, centered around him and, like, serves him right, and my
right.
whole thing is, like, while there were certainly moments within my divorce process and the exiting of the relationship as a whole, there were moments that I did feel very angry,
Yeah.
and that is a normal part of the grief experience, so, I'm not trying to minimize the presence of anger or say that you are not allowed to feel angry if you're going through a divorce or someone treated you really shitty or it didn't work out or whatever. But again, it's been nearly 3 years and I am a totally different human being
Mhm.
from who I was 3 years ago and the decisions I was making 3 years ago and how I showed up in the world. And I don't
Mhm.
have that anger in my life anymore because anger stifles our growth. It stifles
Yes.
us from being able to move forward. And I really noticed how it was keeping me stuck.
Yeah.
And so for this divorce to finally take place, I wasn't even thinking about him. I wasn't thinking about the
You were
outcome. I
thinking
just
about
thought,
you.
yes, like,
You
oh,
were
yes. Like I
like,
just
I'm
was
happy
thinking,
for me. Yeah.
yes, like what am I feeling? I'm feeling relieved. I'm feeling free.
Yeah.
I'm feeling like I can move forward. I'm feeling like, yes, now there's no more like the court
You're
proceedings and
like
going back and
sunshine
forth. Like,
and rainbows and butterflies. And then all of a sudden, these comments come in, and from well
yeah.
intentioned people, I think people who truly wanted to be in conversation and in community and in that space with you, but they picked the
Yeah.
wrong space. And I think we do
Yeah.
this a lot when
Mm.
we decide to have feelings about other people's situations and what that person is
Yes.
sharing.
And the other thing is like, even if you do know all the information, right? So some people, it's one way where you can say, oh, well, you don't know all the things, so you don't get to
Yeah.
feel that way. But even if you do know all the things, even if you were a witness to XYZ, it's not that you aren't entitled to your own feelings or to have empathy or sympathy for what someone's
Mhm.
going through. but it's reminding yourself of what your role is in the context of that situation specific
Mhm.
dynamic of whatever is going on in that moment of time. So if that is my main character moment where I am saying I am relieved, I am happy, I am free, and the response is I'm so angry at him, and how dare him put you through this for so long, and it's
Well, it's
like,
literally like a storm cloud rolls in and you're like, "Wait, wait,
yes.
wait, wait, wait. We had
And
sunshine."
yes, and then on top of that, it's now saying, and the people don't realize they're doing this, but
No.
they're
Mm-mm.
saying, "Hey, I'm going to steal your joy right now, and now I'm going to
Mhm.
task you with the responsibility of attuning to my emotions." And it's actually a very selfish space to be in
Mhm.
unknowingly. And we've
Yeah.
all been that person
Oh,
at
100%.
least once or twice or three times in our lives. We've all been that person. So as I say this, I'm not saying this through like a self-righteous lens of like, I've never been there.
Oh gosh, we've
Um,
all been there. It's part of, I mean, that's
yes,
this is part of growing up, it's part of learning, but that doesn't mean we have to continue these patterns, and it doesn't mean that
right.
we can just let it slide without calling it out, because that's
Exactly.
what Lindsey and Amber are here to do on What the Fox
That's
podcast,
right.
right?
Yes. I mean, and that is a part of learning how to set healthy boundaries
Yes,
is
absolutely.
learning how to learning the difference between a request and a boundary,
Mhm.
learning, what that looks like, sounds like, how to do it effectively, and also how to follow through with that boundary. So if someone's completely ignoring your stated need in that space of vulnerability, I was saying, "Hey, listen, I really don't appreciate you talking about them like that, and that's not really where I'm at, and that's not what
Yeah.
I'm trying to convey. I actually just want to celebrate and be happy for myself right now. And if you can't share space with me, I'm gonna have to leave."
Yeah.
And then you leave, you follow through, or you exit the conversation, or you hang up the
Exit
phone.
stage left.
Yes, nothing wrong with that, guys. Nothing wrong
Yeah.
with that. You're setting a boundary, and it's okay to do that.
Well, and I also think something that comes up in these conversation is, one, a willingness. You have to be able to set your ego aside. You have to be willing to learn something new and to come back and say, "Hey, I handled that wrong. Can I please
Yeah.
try again?" And ask for, because
Mhm.
you and I've had this in our personal conversations where,
Totally. Yeah.
like, we'll be in a deep space of conversation, and oftentimes I say something that isn't necessarily on the right page, and Lindsay's very quick to say, "Hey,
Mm.
that wasn't received well. Like, here is what I heard here." And I'm like, "Oh shit."
I'm so
Like,
sorry.
"Nope, that was not what I meant. I am sorry. Let me try again." Because I do struggle with this, and I struggle with vulnerable conversations because I don't, Lindsay likes to joke around with me that, and I joke around with her that sometimes I forget how to people, because the project manager in me sees something that can be fixed, and I can take away your pain, and I
Mhm.
can fix the thing that's causing the problem, which is not what that person needs in that moment. That person
Yeah.
needs a friend to hold space for a situation and
Yeah.
sit with them in the mud. And we come back to that a lot. Um, but I think as we evolve as a human species and as we evolve as a culture, we can do a better job of this. And I think,
Yeah.
Lindsay, you have some great insights from your coaching business and from your lifelong learnings as well. What would you tell people if somebody comes to them and says, "I have this thing that I want to talk about."
Yeah.
What are some key ways you can hold that space or create that safety or create that flow?
Yeah. Well, I first, I have so much to say in response to what you
So
just
many
said.
things.
Um, so thank you for this question. It's a great question, and I'm going to come back to it in a moment. And if I forget, then you bring me back to it, please.
Yes, ma'am.
um, but I also want to say, Amber, you are an amazing friend, and you do know how to hold space, and you do know how to support people. And I think to your point, there's a lot of people who are also great friends and know how to support people, but it's learning how to support people in the way that they need in that moment of time.
Mhm.
And
That's a good
so
call out.
yeah, because it's like, sure, you're a project manager and you're human, and it is uncomfortable to hear that someone's really suffering or struggling and being
Mhm.
like, well, shit, I can't help make this divorce go any faster.
Yeah, I can't. I
You know,
tried.
yeah.
I put a lot of mental
So,
energy into that. No.
yeah. So I think there's a few things in response to this. One, the first thing that the receiver of the vulnerable conversation can say or not say is just be present in the moment
Hmm.
and say, wow, you're going through a lot. How can I support you today? Or how can I support you right now?
Or
And
what does,
you
I
are,
love this. I'm going to interject because Brene Brown, I love the way she says this. It's what does support look like? Like,
yes.
what does it feel like? What, paint
Mhm.
me the picture, right?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Because my definition of support and Amber's definition of support might look really different, just like our
Hmm.
love languages, guys, which we will definitely have an episode on that
Yes.
for Valentine's Day to be determined. So, in terms of the air date, but yeah, so I think that is a huge open-ended question that we are all capable of asking of when we have someone that has the courage to
Hmm.
approach us with vulnerability. Our role is to sit and hold space with them. Don't try to take away their moment. Don't try to make it about you, even though that's not your intention, but watching some of your I statements perhaps, and just kind of turning it back on the other
Yeah.
person and having a really open ended question of just saying, how can I support you right now? You're going through a lot. And that leaves the door open for the person to say, I just need you to listen right now. I'm just really
Yeah.
frustrated and I just need a vent. I just need a bitch fest and I just need to vent. Or, I feel really task saturated. I don't have an assistant. I cannot afford an assistant. I really could use some help. If you have any bandwidth to support me on this,
Yeah.
do you think you could help me with creating XYZ that would take maybe 20 to 30 minutes of your time this week? And again, you're giving like something on the communicator
Hmm.
to the receiver, the messenger to the receiver is then allowed to state exactly what they need, which is also really hard to do.
Oh my gosh. Yes. It's hard. I find this difficult. I think we've spoken about this in past episodes. Asking for help is one of the most vulnerable things I
Mm.
have ever had to do, right? To like, for me in my history,
Yeah.
I'm always the one who does the thing.
Yeah.
And learning
You're
to
the
ask for
fixer.
help, I'm the fixer. I always
Yeah.
have been. And having the courage to say, I need help with this
Yeah.
thing. Can
Yeah.
you do that for me? Or can you connect me with somebody who can help me with this?
Yeah.
Is like step one in, I think, having a vulnerable conversation for me. That was like
Mhm.
one of the very first, I was like, ooh, that was uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I didn't like it, but I didn't like it in the moment, but the
Yeah.
outcome was very good. And being able to
Oh,
share or like
yeah.
offload something on your plate or, have
Mhm.
somebody show up for you. It's a cool process. And I think,
Yes.
I saw a quote as we were kind of talking about the vulnerability idea that I wanted to share because I think it's impactful for what we do here and for what
Mhm.
humans do out there. And when I say
Yeah.
out there, I mean out in the world, right? So
Yeah.
I am going to reference Brene Brown again because I adore her. Um, and she says, vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. And I truly think that's profound because without vulnerability, nothing changes. Everything stays the same. And we're
Yeah.
all in this individual experience that is
Mhm.
completely disconnected.
And yet here we are as humans where we are all connected. Um, and actually kind of as you talk about Brene Brown, it was one of her quotes that led me to kind of my elevator pitch as an empowerment coach. Because I tell people, I dare people to have the courage to love themselves at the risk of disappointing others.
Hmm.
And I think that is in essence what vulnerability is all about is being really true to the deeper parts and the deeper levels of your soul and every fiber of your being authentic and honoring who you are
Yeah.
at the risk of disappointing the people around you. And holy shit, is that scary.
It is, and empowering
Mhm.
all at the same time,
Yes.
right?
Well, the
Like that
empowerment
mindset
part,
shift. Yeah.
yes, the empowerment part is then saying, "Wow, I can go out there and be true to myself."
Yep.
And in response to doing that, while the people who are receiving your message might not always receive it gracefully, that's not your job to control how they receive the
True,
message.
true, true. Yes.
Your job is to just stand in your power, take up space, state your needs, say where you are, set your boundary, and allow the receiver of the communication to simply receive it. After it leaves your mouth, it's not up to you how they respond. But what you
Hmm.
can do is control the delivery of your messaging. That's in your control. And when those conversations happen, whether they fall flat and it doesn't sit well with the person, or maybe they go great and they exceed your expectations, um, you still can have your own permission to walk away from that conversation and saying, wow, I'm really freaking proud of myself right now. I
Yep.
handled that like a boss. And the old version of me, the old unhealed version of me, would have never had the discernment to respond in the way that I did just now. I am so proud of me.
Yeah. And that is such a good call out too, because if we don't take the time to recognize our growth and we don't take the time to celebrate that mini win or that major win, then
Yeah.
we don't make any progress, right? So I think
Right.
you have to come back to that. Like I like to do a brain dump when I'm having particularly like heavy weeks or like filled weeks with a lot of these type of interactions. And that's where I find my little glimmers of hope and where I'm like, oh, I did a great job there. Like I handled that
Yes.
better than I would have 2 years ago. And it's also where I find areas where I'm like, oh, I could have handled that one better. Let me go back to that person and like
Yeah.
apologize, because that's
Yeah.
you're not always going to handle these
Mm.
conversations well. They're not like there is no perfect. We've said that time and
Yes.
time again, but you're going to stumble and it's going to feel uncomfortable and it's going to feel icky and that's okay because it's part of the human experience.
It is. And can we talk about that for a second? Can we talk
Yeah.
about apologies? Can we talk about how to say I'm sorry and apologies as a whole? I mean,
Yeah,
holy
absolutely.
cow. I feel wow, just I'm glad that you said that because saying I'm sorry is also hard as shit
Yes.
because you are challenging your ego at that point, right? You
Yes.
have to say
I
you got to
messed
get
up.
real honest with your
Yep.
ego and be like, "Hey, you and I need to talk cuz we kind of screwed up over there." And so man, saying I'm sorry can feel so hard and so vulnerable in of itself, right? So it's not just like whenever we talk about vulnerable conversations, it's not just this or just that. It's, communication is hard and being vulnerable in our communication is even harder.
And it's messy. Like,
So
spoiler alert,
messy.
this is
Yes.
messy and it's something that takes work and it's a constant practice. It's like
Yeah.
yoga, it's like meditation. You have to keep
Yeah.
coming back to the mat
That's
and
right.
trying again.
100%. And it is hella messy because I think another part of this is that when we are noticing these mood shifts that are taking place in the conversations that we're having, so if we are starting to feel a little reactive or we're kind of like, who does she think she is talking to me like that? Or why does she da, 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 da? When we start to feel that
Yeah.
spiciness start to come up, you got to check yourself because a part of it is like, we are mirrors of each other, guys.
Uh-huh.
We are mirrors of each other. So whatever's annoying you about that person that you're interacting with, 9 out of 10 times it's a reflection of some part of your deeper healing work that you need to sit with.
Yeah.
And that's a hard truth, folks. That is a hard truth. When you start noticing like your mood shifts are actual reflection of your healing or lack thereof, whew, that's a ego burst.
That's the work right there. That is the work.
Hmm.
That's where it begins and you can choose to stay the same or you can choose to evolve, right? You can choose
Yeah.
to keep being miserable and keep being annoyed by everybody just because
Yeah.
you're recognizing something in them that you don't like about yourself. And I
Yeah.
think I always roll back to like the mean girl references with stuff like this and the things that you call out and you pick out in
Yeah.
other people. And it's like, oh, that's an area that is unsettled in me. Like that's a me thing that I have to work through. That's not their problem. And I think
Yeah.
it's a good reminder for ourselves too, when we are the target of such conversations and such situations, that it's their issue. It's not your issue. You know, if somebody's lashing out at you and somebody's being not holding space for your vulnerability or not holding space for you as a human, if that makes sense.
It does. And I also don't necessarily want to make that an all or nothing statement. I
Oh
don't want
yeah,
to say it's 100% the other person's issue for not having that
fair.
acceptance, just because sometimes I think, okay, so if I'm thinking about my client base, and these are people who have a hard time speaking up, right? And so
Yeah.
people who really have struggled to find their voice, and now I'm starting to empower them to find their voice, so they're like dipping their toes in the water. And then all of a sudden, like with some people I work with, they go from like being silent and submissive their entire life to dipping their toes in the water, to then saying, wow, kind of like the temperature of this water, I think I'm gonna get a little bit deeper in it. And then they just they jump right on
Go right
in.
off the diving board.
And then all of a sudden they're
Yeah.
like super verbal, and
Yeah.
to the extent that um, big emotions might come out that
Yeah.
are warranted to some degree, but also might come out because it's like, 20, 30 years of oppression
It's
that is
been
coming
festering.
out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So of course the person on the receiving end
It's like, oh,
might be like, holy shit, what did I
where did
just
that come
witness?
from?
Where
Yeah.
you've always been the silent one. How come I haven't seen you in 5 years and now you are popping off? Like, who are
Yeah.
you? Who is this version of you? I don't know who you are. Um, so there can be moments like that, which again, it is a reflection of where we are in our healing.
Yeah.
And sometimes those reactions are a lesson or a learning opportunity for the receiver as well, because it's kind of like, wow, I've always known you as this one person.
Mm.
Something's changed here.
Like,
And
wait a minute. This
so
is
they
not
might
how
not
we've
like
always
it.
interacted. Well, and that's true. And
Mhm.
it helps, obviously it depends on your relationship with the person. There's a lot of extenuating circumstances and we can't
Yeah.
possibly cover them all here. But I think the point of the matter is we all have something we can learn. We all can do better in our conversations and holding space for people to be vulnerable and to be seen.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
can all have an appreciation for the work people are putting in on their healing journeys,
Yeah.
and just be kind humans that have open minds and open hearts instead of just like walled off
Mm.
in our own little bubble.
Yes, that openness is huge, because if you are not open, you cannot grow.
Mm-mm.
Like, plain and simple. If you are not open, you cannot grow. You get really stuck being right and
It's no
on your
fun.
side
And
of the
nobody's right all the time.
right. I mean, correct. And there are many who would disagree.
Let
There are
them.
many, many who would disagree. But yeah, so it's just I definitely think that openness piece is probably the most key necessity to have a vulnerable conversation, is
Mhm.
that you have to be open, because that's what fosters trust, growth, um, expansion. I mean, just wow.
Yeah. I think that's awesome. And I know we jumped around a little bit, but I think we did a pretty great job of sticking to our
Yeah.
general theme of vulnerability and sharing
Yeah.
all the things. You did answer my question about holding space, so no need to come back from that one or for that one. But I did want to ask, was there anything else, from your viewpoint that you wanted to share with listeners today on this topic, or any like last takeaway, big thought?
I'm so used to us asking this of our guest
I
speakers,
know.
Amber. I think I want to share a personal favorite quote that's actually by Michelle Obama, and
Okay.
I really like this because in honestly, this has nothing to do with politics, guys. So get your head out of politics. Um, just saying, like, I feel
We
like
don't
whenever
do
you share,
politics here.
I mean, yeah, it's like when you share quotes about, I mean, by politicians, people kind of like automatically say like, oh, that must mean, this way or that way, whatever. It's
It's a
like, no.
person who had a good thought.
And yeah, and
Yeah.
indeed, she's had many. So
Many.
so the quote that I really like from her is, if we can open up a little bit more to each other and share our stories, our real stories, that's what breaks down barriers. But in order to do that, you have to believe that your story has value. Be vulnerable, dare to be vulnerable. And
That's
wow,
powerful.
that's just it. There's so much power in our stories, and that's exactly why we have the guest speakers come on that we have, because they have the strength and courage and bravery to be vulnerable, and they are daring to be vulnerable by coming on and just like letting it all out. And the feedback that we get from our guest speakers after these episodes, they just are like glowing. They can't wait to share their episode with their friends or their followers, because they're like, wow, there was power in my story. My pain did transition into power, and now people can hear that. And so I think here on What the Fox, we really want to not just hone in on that as like our culture here, but we want to encourage you to go out into your own world and foster that safety for it to exist in your personal lives, because that is where so much healing can happen.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a wonderful place to close out today. We shared a few resources throughout the episode, so we'll make sure we get those into the show notes for all of you. And we're so grateful, so very grateful that you continue to come back and listen to Lindsey and Amber at What the Fox podcast. And
That's
we just
right.
want to remind you, we are on YouTube now. Lindsey made mention to it a couple of times during our episode. Head on over to YouTube, because you will want to benefit from the facial expressions.
You really do.
The hand gestures are also fun.
Yeah, I'm very expressive. I mean, one might think I'm Italian with how much I use my hands, but Amber definitely uses her eyes.
Yeah, that no poker face here, friends.
Nope.
But I think with that, we are grateful. We thank you. We ask you to please leave us a 5-star review on whatever platform you are listening to, because that absolutely helps us to bump up in the algorithm. It helps us to show up to new listeners, and it just helps us to spread the word of what we're doing here. So thank you for doing that. For everyone who has, please keep it up.
That's right. So until next week, guys, we'll see you next Tuesday.
See you next Tuesday.
And we all sing, everything is gonna be just fine. It's gonna fall into place. The sun is gonna set on your terrible day.